p.m. right before the business meeting.
Great. You have just congratulations. You've done such a good job in putting everything on YouTube. I've been able to watch almost everything.
It's easy from commercial Zoom. Really easy.
Really?
Just yeah, you push one button and everything works. I don't know how, but it works.
Oh.
Yeah. So we are
Hello, Anna.
about to start.
Yeah.
Suraya Hanım.
Yes. Yes, I am. How are you?
Good.
I'm very glad.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
dear colleagues, we are online now in YouTube. So we will be serious for the next session, and I'm pleased to start our final for today's session on modern existence of ancient traditions. And the most of the papers are dedicated to Ashik music. So the first presenter is our honored Fatah Alikzadeh, who is PhD in arts and professor of Azerbaijan National Conservatory. And he's going to present on Uzair Hachibeli and the perspectives of Azerbaijani Ashik music studies. He sent the pre-recorded paper, so I'm sharing it.
Cool.
Да не слышно, да, ничего?
I'm sorry, I probably forgot to turn on the sound sharing. I'll start from the beginning.
Dear friends and colleagues, as you know, my paper is titled Uzair Hachibeli and the Perspectives for our Sikh Music Studies. I will deal with the composers and musicologists' role in the development of this area of Azerbaijani ethnomusicology. First 30 years or more of his life didn't promise any significant interest in the area of our study, because composer was not in the center of Azik's syncretical art. Nevertheless, the heyday of his musical creativity, opera written in 1937, which is not only the best opera in Azerbaijan, but also was regarded one of the remarkable achievements of the genre in all the Soviet music of that time, had revealed influence of Azeric music. Of course, I am not the first investigator trying my hand in this difficult subject, which quite reasonably came in the center of the music scholarship of Azerbaijan relatively later. The interest in the subject had arose by the words of Uzair Hachibeli himself, who just after the demonstration of opera in Moscow in 1938 told that the leading style of the work is the style of Ashik. But writers and even musicologists who had devoted themselves to Hachibeli's life and creativity didn't go further to repeat the composer's own words. not so much concerning with the analysis of the opera style in relation to the Asig music. According to one of the first biographers of Hajibeli, Khurshid Agayeva, the great composer had encountered Asigs and their performance in the early period of his musical creativity, which is painted also by other musicologists. This fact is quite possible, but doesn't mean composers' deep interest in the study of the area. Let us look at the musical life of Susa in the second half of the 19th century, where Zeyr Hacibeyli was born. There occurred an important change of the regional musical culture, the gradual transition from the old Asig traditions to the Mugham art of the new historical period. Local Asig musical traditions was in heyday approximately in 1870s, and later this was in decline and subsequently replaced by the Mugham art. Before this time, Asig took place in the wedding parties of the town, and Uzair Hajibeli was told by her mother this information, that some about 70, 80 years ago, our gatherings the gathering was held by Asigs. Despite this fact, Asigs always continued to visit Susa wedding parties and also entertainment held in the natural environments of the town. As our informants from Susa, Agdam, and other districts of the Awadis had told me, the Asig from the inside and outside of the region had used to visit this town to earn living, and people always received them formally with respect and honor. Thus, Hajibeli in his childhood spent in his native town could hear Asig music, of course. But it is not an easy task to define Uzair's understanding of Asig music. So while living in Susa, he could perceive and explore this art, and his early operas, such as Leila and Majnun, was influenced by some tunes borrowed by Asig art. Even originally Asig tunes used in his first opera Leila and Majnun and folk songs Evler Var Khana Khana are borrowed, in our opinion, from the Khananda interpretation. By the way, Arazbari was mentioned also by great Uzbek poet Alisher Navoiy in his Mizan al-Afzan as melody belonging to the Iraqian Turkmen. Of course, Uzair could listen to the epic songs, even to apply them in his early operas, but at that time his more close interest was directed to the classical Mugham art. It is not by accident that Muhammad Amin Rasulzadeh, in his article of 1914, was advising Hajibeli to study Asig music in the rural area to create truly national musical heritage. He wrote, for this purpose, it is necessary for him, after appropriating sciences, to leave Petersburg for Caucasus, and here working village to be acquainted with the spirit and music of the nation. Beside it, one may ask question, why Hacibeli in his article of 1919 titled On the Music of Azerbaijani Turks, discussing of the necessity of creation polyphonical, harmonical style in Azerbaijani composed music, didn't pay any attention to the Asik music and particularly to the multi-stringed lute size. His most strong impression about Asik music had appeared during first Congress of Azerbaijani Asik held in 1928. The Asik competition of the Congress had a great impression on the composer, as if he was listening to this music for the first time. There Hacibeli wrote, I was struck by Asik's performances at their first Congress. They had a great impression on me. The listener experienced in hand art can discover for himself in the Asik creativity a lot of news. As a composer, I had decided to use these examples in my works. Afterwards, I had came to the conclusion that on the necessity to study basic of Asik art. First researcher who had highly acknowledged Hacibeli's attitude toward Asik music was Azerbaijani musicologist Amina Eldarova, student of a great composer. He wrote a lot of ideas in her book Azerbaijan Asik Art, published first in Russian, then also in Azerbaijani and English. Amina Eldarova had mentioned the role of composer both as her scientific leader and also of some works on the issue, both musical and scientific ones. So the procedure of both Asik congresses, their contributors together with their themes, and also Asik competition are all accurately documented in Eldarova's book. She mentioned only the essence of Hacibeli's report as the first event, at the first Congress, missing quite understandably a rich anthropological content of it. She wrote, Uzair Hacibeli had made the report in which she briefly characterized the historical development of Asik art. In the third millennium, Hacibeli's views and attitude towards the epic musical traditions of Asiks had begun to attract relatively more attention of investigators, which belong to the younger generation. Tutu Hanım Guluzade, Camilla Hanım Dadaşzade, and also American anthropologist Anna Oldfield. Camilla Dadaşzade's research has a meaningful title, The Rise of Uzair Hacibeli and Asik Music Intertextual Dialogue. She draws parallels between Asik and composed music, where the author had focuses particularly on the creative approach of Hacibeli in his some compositions, beside mentioning some other very important aspects of the subject. Despite these considerations, Uzair Hacibeli, due to his enormous erudition and knowledge, to use the term of sociocultural anthropology, could describe sociocultural positions of Asiks in the set of articles written in the different times, especially in aforementioned brief reports for both congresses of 1928 and 1938, thus demonstrating his views related to the anthropology of music. So their attitude toward Asic music can be examined from his musical creativity and ethnomusicological conception in the various ways. First, composer's creative approach to the Asic art had been comprehensively studied by Camila Dadarsade monograph. Second, Asic roots of his musical works as a material for the comparative study to the epic music of the other Turkic-speaking peoples. He had not been yet conducted. Ethnomusicological activities of Hacıbeyli also can be analyzed from two positions according to the two wings of the field. Musicological studies of Asic music had been highly evaluated by the composer in the 1930s, as we had seen during work on the opera Köroğlu. And this task was recommended to do by his students, Amina Eldarma. At last, in the sphere of anthropology of music, Uzeyir Hacıbeyli had been more successful, raising a plenty of important questions. So it is generally accepted that composer didn't apply Asic music themes in full length. One can find common elements between the oral and composed music. Moreover, we think that some of them may well resonate with the music of other Turkic-speaking peoples, serving as a good basis for the Turkological studies. For example, Köroğlu's song from his opera reminds us not only the melody of Asic, Ayak Divani or Azaplı Beyti, but also, quite surprisingly, the instrumental tambur melody of Uyghur tradition, and also similar Turkish melodic formula. We hope that the number of these samples can be increased, including traditions of Central Asian and Anatolian peoples, and may become crucial point in the activity of our study groups. Thank you very much.
Dear Professor Khaliczadeh, unfortunately, I can't see him online. So he was with us yesterday during the whole sessions. Probably, I don't know what was the problem, but still we are happy to have his pre-recorded video that touches very important side of the studying Asic art, and we have 3 minutes for sharing opinions and discussion. Yeah, Anna, please.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, certainly thanks to Fatah Bey for that presentation. And it makes me think about how Leyli and Mecnun, the Hacıbey of opera, has been able to become well-known or fairly well-known in the West through the work of Alim Gasimov and the Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble. And it's really changed the way that Americans and Europeans perceive the possibilities of Azerbaijani music. So far, there's been no project for Korolu, the Korolu opera, and I feel like also there would need to be an educational project so that people could understand how to understand this opera and what an ashik is, what ashik music is. But I think it would be a wonderful project for the future. So I think his work is foundational to that kind of project.
Yeah, you're right. I think that such scholars as Fatah Bey are making new directions and creating roads for further researches. So it's a really interesting subject to research further. And right now we are going to the next presentation that is also dedicated to the same tradition, but from another perspective. And I would love to introduce you Sanubar Bagirova, Doctor of Arts, Associate Professor, leading researcher of the Department of History and Theory of Azerbaijani Traditional Music at Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences, Institute of Architecture and Art. And the paper is The Art of Ashik, Some Current Trends and Challenges. We also have a pre-recorded paper.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in a
Hello,
moment I will share.
Галибар Ханым у нас, так что в Национальной консерватории вот отсюда.
Замечательно.
Hello, everybody. Мы организуем на русском языке текст презентации моей, а я буду читать на английском для тех, кто для англоязычных. Если таковые есть здесь.
Санубар Ханум, все в силе же, я запускаю в записи.
Нет, я могу живьем, я буду живьем, потому что мне надо...
Хорошо.
Я буду читать, чтобы сэкономить время, потому что у меня еще есть файлы, которые я хотела показать, да, вот так вот. Я поэтому буду читать свой доклад. Да.
Минуточку, демонстрация у нас есть экраны. Вы отключили, пожалуйста, включите
Да,
демонстрацию.
пожалуйста, у вас есть возможность раздавать.
Вот наша презентация.
Posting over 5 centuries of history, the art of Azerbaijani ashiks saw different social and political formations and cultural epochs. Times came and times went, but ashiks remain a pillar of Azerbaijani culture and spirituality alike. Their very art, however, has undergone some inevitable changes along the way. Their social function, forms of communications with audience, artistic language and style, interpretation of timeless topics have changed now and then. Ashiks would enjoy a greater or a lesser influence across Azerbaijani society. But none of this would diminish, let alone eliminate their role and significance for the cultural consciousness of Azerbaijani people. In the virtue of their art, ashiks are but the only, or at least primary, carriers of a feature that they have carried from the 16th century down to our times. And that, I believe, has been their primary cultural mission. I would brand it a gene of Azerbaijanhood, gen Azerbaijanstva in Azerbaijani culture. Throughout the history of their trade, ashiks have been creators and devoted guardians of the Azerbaijani literary language, also in times when the classical Azerbaijani literature was written predominantly in the languages of nations that posed themselves as elder brothers of Azerbaijani nation. a phenomenon of professional nature, the art of being a phenomenon of professional nature, the art of Azerbaijani ashiks has always voiced feelings of the folk and manifested its collective image at the fullest, its temperament, notions of good and evil, disposition towards life, modus vivendi, and so on. I suppose this is the very pure gene of Azerbaijanhood that even today secures them such a stable position in Azerbaijani culture, despite of challenges of time. By challenges of time, I mean the internet, which has brought about the globalization of cultural space and eroded the soil that national cultures had grown upon, and the era of mass culture that has made quantity the measure of quality. But the stability of one or another phenomenon in the culture does not deprive it of social mobility, that is, an ability to adapt to new times and new way of living. We all realize that the heritage of the Ashik art is not just about Ashik literature and music or traditional musical instrument they play. The Ashik culture also comprises traditions whereby professional knowledge is transferred from a teacher to a student, customary forms of listening to Ashiks and the feedbacks, public's feedback to their art, and many, many more. Here I would like to share some of my observations about how the traditional Ashik art is adapting or otherwise to the current lifestyle. For instance, how the latter affects traditional forms of communication between an Ashik and his audience, the transfer of professional knowledge and performance skill, as well as the people who represent a traditional audience for Ashiks. If we sum up all forms existing in modern practice, which are used by the Ashik art to operate in the Azerbaijani society, we can break them down into three distinct forms. Public, on stage, which includes various concerts, festivals, TV shows, etc. Private performances at weddings and various home gatherings like majlis, and professional education of Ashiks. On-stage performance of Ashik is the very field where they are in contact with both national and foreign audience. Over centuries, Azerbaijani Ashiks used to perform in front of various audiences all across the Caucasus, Dagestan, Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and Central Asia. One can roughly outline the acumen of Azerbaijani Ashiks from geographical names mentioned in all Azerbaijani Ashik dastans. But it wasn't in the 20th century that they came to perform outside this traditional cultural habitat. Back in Soviet times, they would participate in folklore festivals and forums in the European part of the larger Soviet Union, or get their performances recorded on radio and LPs in Moscow. For Western audiences, however, the art of Azerbaijani Ashiks was a terra incognita almost until the end of the 20th century. When Azerbaijani Ashiks gave a concert in Paris in 1994, it was almost their first appearance in front of Western public. Now the Western audience is more familiar with the art of Azerbaijani Ashiks. For instance, in 2009, the art of Azerbaijani Ashiks was inscribed on the UNESCO representative list of the world's intangible cultural heritage. And I was really glad to be commissioned to prepare the candidature file for the UNESCO. And I could tell about more of my projects, and I will show just some of them. My CD albums I recorded and released in Europe, including in Italy, in France, And this is the film which I took in cooperation with the SOAS. Some people know that. And there are lots of things I could tell here, but do not want to spend my time. International recognition of the Ashik art creates a broader. This is the BBC recording in towards Ashiks, and another slide is also with BBC host in Shamaha with Yanvar Badal, all-known Shirvan Ashik. So, and there is also a small fragment from the Paris concert of Azerbaijani Ashiks, actually the first concert of Azerbaijani Ashiks. I will try to give some fragment from this. That is the public, completely French public, no Azerbaijani there, and the concert was in auditorium in Louvre. Within the festival, Festival de la Magie in Paris. The international recognition of the Ashik art creates a broader possibility to bring it to the global culture market. And this opportunity, however, are not so broad as to bring about a considerable social change in the life and work of Ashiks. So on-stage performance brings Ashik moral satisfaction rather than material gain. They mostly make a living on private performances at the wedding parties and Ashik majlises. Their top market, wedding market, sits within the so-called Ashik regions, villages and townships in the northwest of Azerbaijan. These are Ganja, Tovuz, Shemkir, Gedebey, Kazakh, Kelbeje, Lachin. In the east of the country, we have Shirvan and partly Muhan, and the north districts are Guba-Khachmaz and Shakizabatalar. There are some, also some Azerbaijani enclaves outside the republic, that is the locations where the hubs and numerous centers of Ashik art formed throughout history. The geography of their wedding tours could now include Russia's area, more or less densely populated by Azerbaijani nationals, mainly natives of the very Ashik regions. Weddings as such are the most customary venue for an Ashik to perform in front of an audience. Until recently, it used to have an established ritual and repertoire. While it used to be a custom at weddings in the past to sit and listen to an Ashik, their performance today is often just a pleasant background that serves to entertain guests at the gathering. Thus, Ashik weddings are increasingly leaning towards pure entertainment, losing their previous aesthetic component. The public today, mostly in cities, regard weddings mainly as a chance to have a good dance, chat with relatives and friends, and lastly listen to a little bit to an Ashik's performance between dances and meals. Such attitude has naturally affected the musical repertoire of modern weddings. Apparently, prevailing now are popular songs with dance rhythms performed with accompaniment of percussive instruments, which are not characteristic for the Ashik music style of Azerbaijan's western regions. Classical Ashik melodies, even if performed at such weddings, are also frequently accompanied by percussion and even MIDI synthesizers, rendering them somewhat dance-like as a result. A wedding majlis is thereby enjoying more dynamic and stir, which is positively perceived by people today, especially the youth. Lack of quiet and listening vibe at such weddings, as well as a hum of conversations and clanking of cutlery, is the reason why musicians have to plug their saz into an amplifier, thus making it sound like an electric guitar. Needless to say that the contemporary Ashik wedding practice no more plays, decent place at least, for Dastan genre, once a cornerstone of the wedding repertoire. Representing a sort of a mini play with one single actor, Dastan requires undivided attention from the public. Today, it can be mainly seen on a concert stage or heard in TV or radio shows. We should admit that the modern wedding, as we know it, does not generally push a modern ashik to pursue self-development. In this sense, it is but a professional ashik training that factors in safeguarding of classical tradition of this art. Such professional training was just informal until the 1990s. Since the early 1990s, some 2 or 3 ashiks personally initiated the inclusion of ashik music classes into the curriculum of primary musical schools. Today, several dozens of primary musical schools across the country have ashik classes teaching children to play saz and perform a few classical ashik songs. But the formal ashik training has not acquired a clearly systematic form yet. It suggests only primary and higher education, unlike Mugham professional education, which is a 3-level, 3-step training. The professional ashik training, both formal and informal, encompasses the classical ashik repertoire and its manner of performance, which is quite important from the standpoint of safeguarding of peculiar traditions of this art. The classical ashik repertoire and manner of performance are demanded to be admitted to professional concert stage, TV and radio programs, or ashik contests. Although urban youth increasingly prefer certified formal education, many still choose learning the craft with ustad, especially in the countryside. Some amateurs learn the ashik repertoire online or from CD recordings. Of course, such practice is not much backed by old ashiks who believe it is impossible to master the secret of this trade by doing so. But the practice shows vice versa that there are some very good ashiks who could mostly learn their trade from CDs and from electronic bearers. As we know, the ashik art has historically formed as a combination of a few forms of artistic activities, such as writing poems, music making, playing saz, and the performing art. One could but notice a new trend in the ashik art over the last decades. Some ashiks, most often those who either do not have a good voice or have lost it for some reason, have focused on the saz performance, developing it to the level of high virtuosity and technical and sonic perfection. The solo saz performance has turned into a highly professional art ever since the times of the late Ashik Adalet Nasibov, an outstanding Azerbaijani musician. This trend today is reflected in the performances of saz players like Adalet Dalidagli, Nimet Gasımlı, Fezail Oruchev, and their students. Ashiks and their audience is yet another aspect of the topic that is of interest to me. The traditional ashik audience is a public that puts ashik art at a top position of its system of artistic interests. This audience is quite socially diverse, from parliament members, men of letters, or scientists, through to housewives. Most part of this audience, as a rule, is represented by natives of so-called Ashik regions, the regions that boast of their old historical Ashik environments and Ashik traditions. It also includes the migrants from Azerbaijani Western regions formerly occupied by Armenia, and the natives of Azerbaijani enclaves in Armenia who were exiled in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. This public truly loves Ashik music and poetry, even it does not know much about artistic details of the Ashik art, and often barely knows the titles of classical songs performed. Nevertheless, from my personal practice, I know many amateurs from the Ashik regions who can play Ashik melodies on the saz, sing them, or keep in memory lots of popular Ashik poems. I would like to show you just fragment from my film.
Dear Sanobar Hanum, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're out of time.
I'm finished. It's only a few sentences, but it is a mature Ashik, a young boy, who, just a couple of minutes, if possible.
Да, что мы сейчас
Вот
слышим?
это, да.
Это только фотография.
Нет, там музыка есть.
А, там музыка.
Чуть-чуть хотя бы. Остановим, да. К сожалению, останови, да. I'm sorry. Now this audience is packing concert halls in Baku and other cities of the countries, and enthusiastically receiving performances of its favorite local ashiks. I guess the delight they feel when ashiks play is mixed with an unconscious sense of gratitude for the opportunity to experience their local roots and identity. For many of these people, the Ashik art is a part of their traditional way of life they left behind, and this cultural tradition now helps them to bring their past and present together into a more or less uniform life continuum. And what I wanted to say, just in conclusion, a few sentences. One cannot say that Azerbaijani public is homogeneous in its attitude to the Ashiks. Some groups, mostly Russian-speaking, like myself, or youngsters, are not keen on it. Some people even openly dislike them. I know these people, but that does not change their standing in Azerbaijani culture. Like them or not, each and every Azerbaijani national still perceives them as carriers of the very gene of Azerbaijanhood. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, dear Sanobar Hanum. Such an interesting perspective on Ashik art and its contemporary state. And what I offer is to move the discussion for the later time, and to start now the next presentation, and then to return to discussion. Probably we will have more points to discuss. And now I should immediately announce the following presenters. Beran Nikayan, Master of Arts in Ethnomusicology from University of Tehran, and as we know, from University of Alberta now, as Anna told, and our dear professor Anna Oldfeld, Associate Professor from Coastal Carolina University, from the United States, and the topic is the Azerbaijani Ashik tradition, transmission, musical change, and the future of a bardic art.
Выключите кабель.
Hello, everyone, and many thanks to the ICTM Turkic Studies Group, and especially to Lara for organizing this conference. It's wonderful to see everybody's work, and I hope we will all be able to see each other for real in Portugal next summer. I'm Anna Oldfield, and I'm presenting with Behrang Nikin, and our presentation is based on a collaborative project that Behrang and I have been working on for several years, considering change in the Azerbaijani Ashik genre in the comparative context of Iran and Azerbaijan. So specifically, Behrang works in the Zanjan region of Iran, while I've been working in Baku and western regions of the Republic of Azerbaijan. And in today's presentation, we'll look at some of our comparative research and some new questions that we've been considering. Okay, so these are two articles that we have co-authored on this topic. You can find them in the Musicologist and the Journal of Folklore Research. So in our first article, as we all know, Azerbaijani people are divided between two states, the Republic of Azerbaijan and Iran. Both have related but also different Ashik traditions. In our first article, we looked at the historical factors of how these two traditions have both diverged and influenced each other, as well as specific factors such as performance context and genre. In contemporary performance, one thing we noticed in both places was a greater musicalization of Ashik performance, so more time spent playing music and less time telling dastan. An important role in this was played by Ashik Adalet Nesibov, whose virtuoso saz playing, as Jean Doring noted, brought a shift to more musical values to a genre that had been more about storytelling and poetry. His model has been very influential on Ashiks in both Azerbaijan and Iran. There are other factors, such as Soviet emphasis on playing in ensembles, that we talk about in our articles. So in our second article, we focused on how changes in methods of transmission, such as the change from the Ustad Shagird apprenticeship method to saz lessons and self-teaching, were impacting the trend towards a more musical and less bardic performance. In both Iran and Azerbaijan, we saw the musical performance of saz playing and singing were becoming prized over the telling of dastan. We also contextualized these changes into theories of musical change and proposed that the genre was in flux and could be changing from bardic to musical. One thing we also noticed was that greater musicalization in Ashik performance was also accompanied by the inclusion of music from outside of the Ashik genre, for example, mugam episodes or popular songs. So this led us to another question, which is today's focus. How does Ashik music in performance relate to the genre's traditions? Although this can change a lot between contexts, we have observed that the music that Ashiks play in performance often draws from many genres outside of the Ashik canon. Another way of phrasing this question is, what is the difference between Ashik music and an Ashik's music in live performance? So for the Ashik genre, we can propose there is a canon accepted by both Ashiks and scholars that defines the music in specific ways. For example, there's a canon of sazhava, named metric vocal musical entities played in Ashik performance, such as Bashtubeti or Ruhani. However, live performances can include music from many other genres. For example, it is common to hear an Ashik perform a mugam-style singing sequence, or they might include national or urban songs such as Jairan. Thus, we see the Ashik's repertoire is different from the Ashik repertoire. Now, this brings us to Behrang's research on the role of audience requests. in bringing songs from multiple genres into the Ashiq's repertoire.
Hello, everyone. This is Behrain. We have written about the Ashiq genre as a bardic system which combines music, poetry, and prose with performance behavior. When an Ashiq performs a dastan, he integrates these elements into a harmonious whole. When we talk about musicalization, these are performances where Ashiqs play isolated musical pieces. And there are many modern performance contexts encouraging this, including TV shows, social media, and concert halls. The wedding party is a very traditional performance context for Ashiqs, so we might expect a traditional repertoire of canonical Ashiq Hawa here. But the wedding party, which is led by an Ashiq, includes music from outside the Ashiq genre, including dance songs, Persian and Azerbaijani classical music, and poetry, and Persian and Azerbaijani pop songs. Thus, we can say that music from the traditional Ashiq repertoire plus music from other genres represents the individual Ashiq's repertoire. Here I want to show you a video of Ashiq Nader performing in a wedding ceremony in the Zanjan region in Iran. I recorded it in September 2015.
Ama haber aldı, dedi bana bir Şehriya şehrine sarı bir kız, Ermeni kızı seni deyip aldı. Kerem düştü yola bala gelir. O zaman yetişti bir tane biz şahıra, öz dilimiz eşahir olanlar. Gördü bir karı pulu çarpıydı. Ama bu karının boynunda bir yaylık vardı, Kerem almış Əsli xanıma. Həmin yaylıq. Ay gəlin mənə, başıma dönün, mənə çaydan, çörəkdən verə. Amma sənə bir sözüm var. Nə sözüdür? Bu qarı da elə o 7 qat qarılardandır ki, Əzrailin elə yanından çıxıb dalır. Bir oruçları səpəsən, biri yerə düşməz. Ay bana, mənim sözü, indi qulaq asına. Kərəm götürür, nə deyəcək?
So when considering how an Ashiq's performance relates to the genre's traditions, we can look at how context influences what music an Ashiq chooses to play. There are many elements of this, but I would like to concentrate on one aspect, the role of the audience. In weddings, audiences can request Ashiqs to sing a specific poem, Ashiq song or pop song, or to sing or tell about a specific topic or person. In some cases also, the Ashiq is asked to narrate a dastan, particularly its prose sections. The Ashiq must respond to the request, which might mean Persian or Azerbaijani avaz, reciting a classical poem, giving a speech, reciting dastan, or singing an Ashiq or popular song. The requests are important for the Ashiqs because the audience member who makes the request will pay money to the Ashiq. And also, ashiqs can impress the audience by their musical verbal abilities in responding to requests and achieve fame in the ashiqs community and being able to earn more money. We have discussed how changes in methods of transmission have led the ashiq genre to be more musical, and how verbal aspects of the genre have become less important. But requests force ashiq bards to perform all aspects of their genre. In fact, although these are the requests that cause the emergence of many extra generic songs and poems, at the same time, they help the verbal aspects of the genre to survive.
So you can see that audience requests influence what music an ashiq will have in his repertoire. And in fact, this repertoire includes many musical pieces that are from outside of the traditional ashiq genre. Thus again, the ashiq's repertoire is different from the ashiq repertoire. So we are working on generating research questions on this topic and would love to have your feedback. So some of the questions we're thinking about are, how do audience preferences impact the musical and bardic aspects of the genre? Is there any fixed model for the genre, or has it always been constantly expanding and changing? And how do we think about extra generic music in ashiq performances? Are there theoretical models that can help us to talk about it? So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you again to the organizers, and we'll look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, dear Beran and Anna, for such an interesting perspective on ashiq's repertoire. And we have 5 minutes for the discussion of both papers by Sanubar Hanum and by Professor Oldfield. Please. Are there any questions to Professor Sanubar Bagirova or to Anna Oldfield and Beran Mikayan?
Well, excuse me. Thank you so much again for your attention. And I really want to thank Sanubar Hanum, because her presentation brought up so many of the same questions. And I think she had a very important point that there's not one audience for ashiq music. There are many, and they all have different tastes. And even one ashiq can appeal to all of these different audiences. I thought from her paper, there's an interesting tension in that Western audiences, and she's done so much work to introduce ashiq music to Western audiences, always prefer what they consider more authentic. So they always prefer to see, you know, what they consider a traditional performance. And yet so often Azerbaijani audiences prefer many, many varieties, and often ones that are we would think of as less authentic. And so for the ashiq themselves, I can imagine, right, the tension. And as she also said, the internet has had a big influence. You know, if you watch ashiq performances on Facebook and Instagram, now also it's competing for likes, right? This is part of how they get jobs too. You get more likes, you're more likely to get hired at a wedding. So many interesting things.
That is the same factor, that quantity has more important than quality.
So may I say something?
Yes, sure.
Sorry, Abdullah, we have question
Okay, after
from
that.
Zakia, then
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Anna. I'm glad to meet you here. And it was very interesting, your report. And my question is, you have been here in Kazakhstan. Have you met any of the representatives from the Azerbaijani diaspora? If you met, have you made some research about the surviving Ashik performance here or not? Thank you.
Hello, Zakia. Thank you for your question. That's very interesting because I actually just wrote an article about Azerbaijani diaspora in USA, where there are no Ashiks in diaspora. It's a very different question, but I have not met Azerbaijani diaspora in Kazakhstan, and I would love to, if there's a possibility, we could have that question. Yeah.
Hopefully. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Please, Abdullah.
Actually, my question was similar with Zakia, because you said most people in Azerbaijan and Iran, but also in Turkey. There are so many Azerbaijani people, and also in the eastern part of Turkey, in Kars and Ardahan, and there is still strong Ashik tradition exists in these regions. So I would like to ask only, have you ever experienced or worked on this issue and compare between these traditions in different regions?
Yeah, thank you, Abdullah. I am so interested in this question, and I have some contacts among some Turkish scholars that are working with Ashiks, but this is something I feel like we need this third, right? We have the Azerbaijan, Iran, and we really need to also bring in that third area of Turkey for comparison. I think it's very important. So
in Turkey, there are some different Ashik traditions, and one of the important one is the Azerbaijani Ashik tradition in Anatolia. So, okay, thank you very much, Anna. It was a very good paper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, Sanubar Hanım, maybe you would like to say something about these relations between Azerbaijan and Turkey.
That is not the question I investigated properly, but I know, of course, I'm aware about the historical, not only Kars, also Agbaba district, and of course, I'm aware about it, but I focused my research on the Ashiks. I worked here in Azerbaijan, and I worked with many of them, really. I recorded many of them. I restored some old recordings and released a pack of CDs with classical heritage of the Ashiks, of Azerbaijani Ashik. But in this pack of classical heritage of Azerbaijani Ashiks, there are some Ashiks from Agbaba district, which is closer to Turkey than to Azerbaijani tradition. And of course, I would like to extend the limits of my research, but it is connected with the limits of other sorts. So that's why. But that is really interesting. Do you know why it is interesting to me? Because all the isolated, and now Lala Hanım just recalled me about it. As a rule, the isolated societies, social groups and special ethnic enclaves, they preserve the old traditions more than those who live in the more or less big country. For instance, Borchalı Ashiks, Azerbaijani enclave in Georgia, their traditions is apparently older, sound older than the music which we listen to in Baku. And Borchalı Ashiks, each time when I listen to Borchalı Ashik, Borchalı, that is a district in Georgia, Marneuli, Gardabani, the Georgian, now Georgian names. And their traditions is apparently sound more conformist than the traditions of Ashiks in Azerbaijan now. And I was very glad to see the wedding fragment from a wedding party in Zanjan. That is the motherland of my grannies. So, because my grannies, my grannies came from Zanjan. So that was really very interesting. So they managed to keep it because the Ashik environments there are more isolated from the general trends of the Iranian music, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry to interrupt the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much to all the
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
I should ask right now whether Rosa Amanova is present here. They should connect from their university. Роза Асановна, вы с нами?
Здравствуйте.
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 Okay. Then I'm happy to announce our next presenter and the last for today's sessions. Amanova Rosa, the Doctor of Arts, Professor, People's Artist of the Kyrgyz Republic, laureate of the Toktogul State Prize and head of the History and Theory of Art Studies Department at Altimishbaev Philosophy Institute of Kyrgyz National Academy of Sciences, with a paper on instrumental melodies competitions of the Kyrgyz people. Роза Асановна, придерживайтесь регламента. У вас 15 минут на доклад.
Спасибо вам большое. Здравствуйте, дорогие участники конференции. Позвольте поприветствовать вас от имени всего кыргызского народа, от себя лично, а также фонда «Кыргызская традиционная музыка». Значит, фонд был создан еще в 2004 году, и по инициативе фонда в 2013 году парламентом Кыргызской Республики был принят постановление об установлении 25 апреля Днем традиционной музыки, а также к 15-летию Дня традиционной музыки в 2019 году указом президента был указ 9 сентября День Коммуза. Вот очень хотелось бы сказать, что фонд работает в области сохранения и распространения традиционной музыки, не только кыргызской, но и живущих в нашей стране всех этносов Кыргызстана. Пользуясь случаем, хотела бы вашему вниманию представить короткий видеосюжет о нашей республике. И очень, конечно, мы надеемся, что в 2022 году будем организовать научную конференцию ICTM уже в Кыргызстане. В устной культуре кыргызов музыкальный инструмент – это ценнейший документ, продукт кочевого и скотоводческого уклада. Быта, источник познания истории, культуры, музыкальных традиций, художественных достижений народа. Появление и музыка кыргызских инструментов, таких как хомус, кылгыяк, чор, чопочор, оскомус, жыгач оскомус, жезнай, чымылдак, чыңырон, сурнай, керней, доулбас, коңгуро, асатаяк и другие сопровождались народными легендами, которые сохранились до нашего времени. Конечно, это и красивые поэтические легенды. Струны камуза, это шиповый трехструнный хордофон, хранят музыкальную мудрость столетий. Он и есть главный источник этнокультурной информации кыргызов. И здесь тоже хотим вам представить видеоматериал. Дело в том, что мы нашли этот видеоматериал из архива, где были наши выдающиеся носители традиционной музыки. Там и был сам Атай Огумбаев, его ученики, его школа, это школа Токтогула, и, конечно, наши выдающиеся устаты Истебес Турсуналиев, Адамкалай Байбатыров и так далее. Пожалуйста, посмотрите, это уникальнейшие кадры, уникальный видеоматериал. Сегодняшняя тема моего доклада именно инструментальное состязание кыргызов, которое называется кучертиш. Вот мы только что видели наших выдающихся носителей традиционной музыки. Кучертиш – это инструментальное состязание, которое получило широкое распространение в музыкальном быту кыргызского народа до начала 20 века. Это древняя форма музицирования в культуре кыргызов, что подтверждается высокой развитостью данного жанра в дореволюционный период. Это сфера профессионального искусства, доступная лишь тем музыкантам с незаурядным по дарованию мастерству. Оно демонстрирует не только исполнительское, но и, конечно, композиторское искусство музыканта. Способность инструментального языка выражать замысел народного создателя-композитора, соответствие его диалогическому соперничеству привели к расцвету искусства джарыш, милдеш, кучертиш, то есть это состязание именно прекрасных кю, камбаркан, там кербес, толго и так далее, были вот разные жанры. Участие в состязаниях способствовало признанию таланта музыкантов, их широкой известности, упрочению профессионального таланта, профессионального статуса. Состязания были яркими и запоминающимися, не оставляли равнодушными присутствующих, надолго сохранялись в памяти народа. Рассказы о них передавались из поколения в поколение. Участники соревнования демонстрировали не только личное исполнительское мастерство, но и, конечно, они несли груз ответственности за инструментальную школу, а также за свой род, от имени которого они выступали. Кучертыш, это состязания были приурочены к определенным событиям. Они проводились во время праздников, свадебных мероприятий, юбилеев, ярмарок, конечно, и, конечно, көкбөрі, конных соревнований. Да? В те дни коммунисты могли проявить свою индивидуальность импровизации. Обычно во время кучертыш перед исполнением коммунист в устном рассказе излагал содержание и историю инструментальной пьесы, а после ее исполнения его соперник должен был суметь с одного же проигрывания повторить услышанную кю, учитывая настройку, технику исполнения и образность, конечно. И затем он исполнял свою авторскую кю и, естественно, возвращал первому участнику очередь. Музыкальное состязание продолжалось до тех пор, пока один не смог повторить кю соперника. Проигравшим считался тот, кто не сумел проиграть соперника. Такую же мысль можно встретить у Алагушева в своей монографии «Калымдардың кылдары». Он описывает, мы брали именно как фактологический материал, цитирую: «Осенью 1876 года в селе Джерсу Ортосу Көтмалды на северном берегу озера Сыкуль проходили национальные игры во главе биев Сыкульской, Нарынской, Чуйских долин. Лучшие певцы были удостоены призов конкурса песен, лучшие лошади одержали победу в скачках. Началось соревнование народной инструментальной музыки «Кучертыш». Юноше коммунисту Мураталы предстояло состязание в инструментальной дуэли именно с Боккотоном из Нарына, Турдукоджо из Чуйской долины. Вот ему пришлось именно выйти на состязание великими коммунистами. Старше него, конечно. Мураталы сел перед своими соперниками, нарастало внезапное волнение народа, люди начали спорить, что такому юноше, как Мураталы, не победить таких известных и опытных коммунистов, которым было уже за 60. Состязание началось, на сцену пригласили Боккотона, первого участника конкурса. Боккотон даже не стал рассказывать содержание мелодии и начал играть на комузе, при этом показывая Мураталы унижительные гримасы. Народ расхохотался. Мураталы спросил название мелодии. Боккотон с иронией ответил, что кю называется мелодией обиженного бородатого мужчины. У него были редкие клочья бороды. Боккотон завершил свое выступление на саркастической нотке. Настала очередь Турдукоджо. Он также начал играть мелодию молча. Мураталы внимательно слушал его также. Когда мелодия закончилась, кто-то из толпы спросил Турдукоджо, что это за мелодия? Тогда Турдукоджо сказал, что мелодия называется «Пухлых и красных щек». Щеки у Мураталы краснели от волнения и обиды, однако он проявил свое благородство и решил защищать свою честь и талант. Затем он на сцену вышел и повторил кю Боккотона и Турдукоджо, при этом исполнил также свою мелодию. Боккотон спросил название мелодии. Он ответил, что его мелодия называется мелодией двух черно-пестрых быков. Народ разразился громким смехом. Один из правителей по имени Казы подал от смеха и ударился ногой о складную стенку юрты и спросил: они, наверное, слабые быки для вспашки весеннего поля. Таким образом, Мураталы победил своих соперников. Боккотон очень обиделся на Мураталы, а Турдукоджо оценил мастерство Мураталы и пожелал ему успехов. Конец цитаты. Здесь, конечно, был вознагражден Мураталы высокой честью. Летом 1905 года талантливые импровизаторы, коммузисты, комедианты и сказители эпоса «Манас» из Нарынской и Чуйской долин приняли участие в большом торжественном мероприятии в местности Сарой на Исыколе. На то время пришелся расцвет творчества известного коммуниста Карамолдо, который одержал победу над Байгабылом. великим музыкантом своего времени из Иссык-Кульской долины. И так началось состязание коммузистов. На сцену шли Карамолды и великий коммузист Устат Мураталы Куренкеев. Слово предоставляется Мураталы. Он представился, что меня, цитирую, меня зовут Мураталы Куренкеулу. Теперь ваша очередь, молодой артист. Отвечает Харамолдо. Меня зовут Харамолдо. Мое второе имя Токтамамбет. Но испокон веков в нашей культуре существует культ уважения к старшим. Я не могу нарушить эту традицию. Я даю слово вам. Отвечает Мураталы. Спасибо. Тогда я начинаю исполнять кю. Содержание данного произведения связано с жизненной историей 3 девочек-сирот, которые потеряли родителей во время кыргызского исхода в Турпане. Гибель и личная трагедия оставили глубокую рану в душе девочек. Все это отражено в данной кю. Кю закончилась. Мураталы был, как всегда, справедлив и мудр. Вот моя последняя кю. Если ты сможешь повторить, то мое исполнение в точь-в-точь, то победа за тобой. Если я сумею переиграть тебя, то победа за мной. Карамолдо сумел повторить кю Мураталы без ошибок. Мураталы был приятно удивлен. Он был в восторге, он был удивлен от исполнения Карамолдо. Он сказал: браво, сынок, ты также виртуозно сыграл мою авторскую кю. Ты возмужал, и твой талант расцветает. Желаю тебе творческих успехов. То есть дал бата. Карамолдо, теперь, когда очередь Карамолдо, он сказал, что я исполню кю Байгазының күйісі, и он рассказывал историю этого кю. Жил-был один бедняк по имени Байгазы. Жил на берегу озера Иссык-Куль. Он жил в бедноте и еле сводил концы с концами, работая у богатых. Однако у него были и радости жизни, у него была очень красивая жена и его комус. Но радость бедняка долго не продлилась. Богач отнял его жену. Ему было так тяжело на душе, был совсем несчастным. Тогда он сочинил данную кю. Кю передает печаль и тоску. Я, в свою очередь, ввожу изменения в аккордах и немножко меняю форму. И вот он исполнил. После чего говорил Мураталы: прекрасно, сынок, я хочу сказать тебе одно. Назови данную мелодию сынган бугу, разбитая бугу, потому что Байгазы потерял свою жену, и ему стыдно, не так ли? Хотя ты моложе меня, сколько тебе талантов, ты, конечно, победил. Народ бурно поддержал Мураталы, и Карамолдо был удостоен главного приза состязания инструментальной музыки. Конец цитаты. Жанр кучертыш инструментальной музыки не был объектом научного исследования в кыргызском музыкальном искусстве. Чтобы восполнить этот пробел, мы изучали специфику народно-профессиональной музыки в нашей докторской диссертации «Устно-профессиональная музыка кыргызов». Как вид музыкального состязания, игра на инструментальной музыке на камузе имеет свою специфику и жанровые особенности. Если поэты соревнуются между собой в словесном мастерстве, то ораторы сравниваются между собой в искусстве красноречия. Оно у нас сохранился в виде сармерден, где исполняли именно пословицы и изречения кыргызского народа. В инструментальной музыке на камузе особенно важны музыкальный слух, музыкальная память, эмоциональная восприимчивость и музыкальным образом и, конечно, формам. Состязания показа инструментального мастерства на камузе кучертыш были широко, как мы выше сказали, в XIX веке, в XX в начале. К сожалению, многие имена, выдающиеся как Токтогул и Майлыбай, Боккөтөн и Майлыбай, Тайтеки и Мадыган, Мураталы и Чыңгышпай, Ниязалы и Майлыбай, Мураталы и Карамолды и так далее, вот все исполнители, выдающиеся наших кучертыш, остались, как бы сказать, в истории, но, к сожалению, данный вид искусства не имеет продолжения. Но в 2011 году я пыталась организовать как бы этот вид, можно сказать, использовать в виде концертного номера и пригласила в Кыргызстан Эржана Джаманкеева, он очень известный молодой дамбрист, и наш Закырбек Дүйшенбек уулу. Они в 2011 году сделали шикарный, можно сказать, номер. Дело в том, что здесь учитывается, конечно, форма совершенно другая, как мы в предыдущем привели несколько примеров, но зрители были в восторге именно от передачи одного музыканта другому, второму музыканту музыкального замысла и, конечно, динамических средств, и всю богатую палитру красок камоза и дамбры. Такой взаимообмен народно-профессиональной музыки еще раз подтвердил нашу историческую и генетическую общность, что в раннем времени, дай бог, чтобы мы могли это возродить. Вот здесь хочется тоже еще раз вам дать видеоматериал, послушать, потому что все-таки это исполнение осталось в истории, можно как архивный материал.
Роза Санна, 1 минута. 1 минута.
Дамбра, да? А еще нет, да? Дамбрана. Поскольку нет времени, разрешите завершить мое выступление научное. Значит, Кучертыш, как я ранее уже сказала выше, что в советский период не развивался. Кумусчу в настоящее время показывает свое мастерство не только вот на концертных, к сожалению, выступлениях. Исчезновение именно вот этого вида инструментальной музыки Кучертыш уничтожило почву, где Кумусчу мог бы развивать и, конечно, блистать своим композиторским мастерством перед зрителями. Это привело к тому, что нет новых профессиональных кю, потому что нет поддержки, можно сказать, именно профессионалов. Возрождение Кучертыш – это, конечно, вопрос, который нужно решать уже на уровне государственной культурной политики. Спасибо вам большое за внимание. Я завершила свой научный доклад.
Thank you, dear Rosa Sanovna. It was a really great presentation of one of the disappearing tradition that is probably still can be revived. And thank you for your efforts in the revival of this tradition. Unfortunately, we have no even a minute for the discussion. I believe that there must be many comments. Probably after the business meeting, we will have time for discussing the problems we heard about in the presentations. And now I should invite you to, we have 1.5 minutes to switch from this Zoom conference to another one. Those of you who received the links to the Zoom meeting of study group, please use this link to switch the business meeting.
А сейчас он говорит, на другую Zoom-конференцию дает.
Жалко,
Да, Роза Санна, вот,
можно было ответить на вопросы.
Да, ну вот у нас буквально минута осталась до бизнес-встречи, мне надо переключить на другую Zoom-конференцию, но мы там можем продолжить наше обсуждение после того, как обсудим официальные вопросы. Так что, пожалуйста, вы тоже получили ссылку, пожалуйста, присоединяйтесь.